"Don't make me do this," she whispered. What the rancher did next outraged the town. The early morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and hay. On the outskirts of town, the Mitchell family ranch stretched across rolling fields, bordered by a thin line of trees and a weathered wooden fence. It wasn't a large ranch, but it had been in the Mitchell family for generations, and every inch of it held memories, stories, and the hard work of those who came before. Sarah Mitchell stood near the barn, brushing a lock of hair from her face as she watched the horizon. Her hands were calloused from years of chores, from feeding animals to mending fences, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent her entire life working with the land. Her father had been ill for months now, and the responsibility of keeping the ranch running had gradually fallen onto her shoulders. He had always been a strong, unyielding man, and seeing him weakened and vulnerable had been difficult for her. Despite the challenges, Sarah had grown into her role. She knew which cows were due to calve, how to patch a leaking water trough, and how to read the weather in a way that seemed almost instinctual. The ranch wasn't just land, it was a way of life, and Sarah understood that protecting it meant everything. Life in Red Creek was quiet, sometimes painfully so. The town had only a few hundred residents, most of whom had lived there their entire lives. People knew each other's birthdays, their business, their struggles, and their triumphs. Gossip traveled faster than the mail, and secrets were rare. Sarah liked the simplicity of it, the way everyone looked out for one another. But it also meant that any change, no matter how small, could ripple across the town like a sudden storm. That morning, as Sarah checked the fence lines and made sure the water troughs were full, she noticed a vehicle slowly making its way down the gravel road that led to her property. It was a large, black pickup truck, shiny and intimidating, its engine humming with power. She squinted, trying to make out who it was, and her stomach tightened slightly. The truck came to a stop at the edge of the property, and a man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that seemed to fill the space around him. His boots crunched on the gravel as he walked toward her, and Sarah instinctively took a step back. "Good morning," the man said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm Luke Thompson. I just bought the land next door." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. She had heard of Luke Thompson. He was a rancher from a nearby county, known for expanding his property aggressively, and for being both respected and feared in equal measure. People in Red Creek often talked about him in hushed tones, some admiring his success, others wary of his reputation. Sarah kept her greeting polite but cautious. "Good morning, I'm Sarah Mitchell. This is my family's ranch." Luke nodded, his gaze sweeping across the fields. "I wanted to introduce myself. I'll be running cattle nearby, and I thought it would be good to meet my neighbors." Sarah smiled politely but didn't offer any further conversation. She knew that words could sometimes be the start of trouble. "Nice to meet you," she said. "I hope your cattle do well. Just please make sure you don't stray onto our land." Luke's smile was easy, almost charming, but there was a firmness in his tone that hinted he wasn't used to being told no. "Of course," he said. "I respect property lines, but sometimes circumstances can make things complicated." Sarah felt a flicker of unease. There was something about his confidence, his way of speaking, that suggested he was used to getting what he wanted. She didn't like it, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she returned to her chores, trying to ignore the lingering feeling that today was the start of something bigger than either of them expected. Over the next few days, the presence of Luke's ranching operations became more noticeable. Large trucks and trailers moved across the neighboring property, and the sound of cattle lowing and hooves on dirt carried over the fence lines. Some townspeople saw it as a sign of growth and opportunity, but for Sarah, it was a reminder of vulnerability. Every step Luke took on the land next door felt like a potential threat. She often found herself walking the perimeter of the ranch, checking fences, ensuring that nothing had been tampered with. It wasn't just about livestock or crops, it was about preserving a way of life. Her family's history was written into every fence post, every tree, every field. Losing even a small part of it would feel like losing a piece of herself. At the local feed store, whispers and sideways glances followed Sarah whenever she mentioned Luke. Some townspeople encouraged her to be cautious, while others suggested that she might be overreacting. "He's just trying to expand," one neighbor said. "Don't make it a bigger deal than it is." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than a simple expansion. There was an edge to Luke, something calculated in the way he spoke, the way he moved. She remembered the first time he had stepped onto her property, the subtle way he had looked around as if assessing weaknesses. That look had stayed with her, a quiet warning that things could escalate if boundaries weren't respected. Despite her worries, Sarah kept a routine. Each day she woke before sunrise, tended to the animals, repaired fences, and ensured the land was in good condition. The work was exhausting, but it was also grounding. It reminded her why she fought so hard to protect the ranch. She found solace in the rhythm of her chores, in the way the animals trusted her, in the way the sun rose and set over familiar fields. As the days passed, Luke's presence grew more frequent. He would ride along the fence lines on horseback, sometimes stopping to speak with Sarah, sometimes simply observing. Each encounter was polite on the surface, but Sarah sensed the underlying tension. He seemed to be testing her, seeing how much resistance he could meet before pushing further. One evening, as the sky turned a deep shade of violet and the air cooled, Sarah sat on the porch of the ranch house, a cup of tea in her hands. She watched Luke riding back and forth across the neighboring land, the cattle following behind him. The sight made her uneasy, but it also steeled her resolve. She had inherited this land, not just as property, but as a responsibility. She couldn't let fear dictate her actions. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her father coughing from inside the house. Even in his weakened state, he tried to reassure her with a smile. "Don't let them scare you," he said quietly. "This is our land, Sarah. We've worked too hard to let anyone take it lightly." Sarah nodded, feeling a mix of pride and worry. She knew her father was right, but she also understood that standing her ground would not be easy. Luke was persistent, and his influence in the area was significant. If he decided to push boundaries, she would have to be ready. The next morning brought a fresh challenge. A section of the fence near the creek had been damaged overnight. The wood was splintered, some posts knocked over. Sarah inspected the damage carefully. There was no sign of livestock entering, but the timing was suspicious. She couldn't be certain, but the incident made her more vigilant. Sarah began keeping a detailed journal of events, dates, times, observations of Luke's activities, any unusual incidents. She knew that if things escalated, having a record could be important. She also started talking to other neighbors discreetly, gauging their opinions and gathering information. Some were sympathetic, some indifferent, but everyone had noticed the changes in the area. As weeks turned into months, the tension between Sarah and Luke simmered quietly. Their interactions were measured, each aware of the other's determination. Luke continued to operate his ranch efficiently, and Sarah continued to protect her land with equal diligence. Both were skilled in their work, both confident in their methods, and both unwilling to back down easily. Through it all, Sarah found moments of reflection and clarity. She would walk through the fields in the early morning, feeling the dew on the grass, listening to the soft calls of the birds, and reminding herself why she fought so hard. The ranch was more than a piece of land. It was a legacy, a connection to her family, and a testament to resilience. She knew that standing up to Luke wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. By the time summer arrived, the town had begun to notice the quiet standoff. Conversations at the general store, the diner, and even at the church hinted at anticipation. People speculated about what might happen next, who would give in, and who would stand firm. Sarah remained focused on her work, refusing to let rumors distract her, but she couldn't ignore the growing sense that the coming weeks might bring more than just normal challenges. And so life continued on the Mitchell Ranch, a mix of hard work, vigilance, and quiet determination. Sarah rose each morning with purpose, tending to her animals, repairing fences, and observing the land with an unwavering eye. The world outside the ranch might have been changing, but within those fields, she held the line, ready for whatever might come next. The sun set each evening in brilliant hues of gold and red, casting long shadows over the land that had been her family's for generations. In those moments of stillness, Sarah understood that the real challenge wasn't just about land or cattle. It was about standing up for what she believed in, even when the outcome was uncertain. She felt a mixture of anxiety and resolve, knowing that the days ahead would test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. And somewhere beyond the tree line on the land Luke now owned, he too was watching, planning, and waiting. The quiet town of Red Creek, with its history, gossip, and traditions, was on the verge of witnessing a clash that would leave no one untouched. The next morning, the air carried a sharp chill that hinted at the coming fall. Sarah Mitchell rose before dawn, her body tired from endless chores, but her mind alert and restless. The events of the past weeks lingered in her thoughts, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Luke Thompson's presence loomed over the Mitchell ranch like a shadow she could neither ignore nor dismiss. His arrival at the property that morning seemed inevitable, and deep down, she feared it might bring trouble. She dressed quickly, pulling on worn jeans and a flannel shirt, her boots already caked with dried mud from yesterday's work. The animals awaited her, each expecting their morning routine, and she moved among them with practiced ease. The cows lowed softly as she approached, recognizing her steps, the sound of the familiar voice that had fed and tended them for years. Even in the calm of the morning, her heart carried tension, like a tightly wound string that could snap at any moment. It wasn't long before she saw him, a dark silhouette against the rising sun, the unmistakable black pickup truck creeping up the gravel road. Luke had arrived earlier than expected. Sarah paused, her hand gripping the gate, unsure whether to meet him immediately or wait until she had more information. The truck stopped near the edge of her field and he stepped out, surveying the land with his usual confident stride. His boots crunched on the gravel and the sound echoed across the still morning. "Good morning, Sarah," Luke called, his voice calm, yet carrying an undertone of challenge. "I wanted to discuss something with you." Sarah's stomach tightened. She approached cautiously, maintaining a polite distance. "Good morning, Luke. What brings you here so early?" she asked, keeping her tone measured. Luke smiled faintly, a smile that was friendly on the surface but held a quiet edge beneath. "I need to graze my cattle on your land temporarily," he said, his words deliberate. "The grass on my property isn't enough this season, and this would be beneficial for both of us." Sarah felt a flash of anger mixed with disbelief. The Mitchell Ranch was not only her livelihood but her family's legacy. Allowing someone to trample the fields, even temporarily, could destroy the delicate balance she had worked so hard to maintain. She took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I'm sorry, Luke, but that's not possible. The land belongs to my family, and I cannot risk the cattle damaging our pastures." Luke's eyes narrowed slightly. He leaned against the truck, studying her as if trying to assess her resolve. "I understand your concern," he said, his voice smooth, "but there are ways we can make this work without causing damage. It won't take long." Sarah shook her head, her voice firmer now. "I appreciate your offer, but the answer is still no. I have to protect what's ours." A brief silence hung between them, heavy with tension. Luke glanced over the fields, then back at Sarah. "You're determined," he said quietly, almost admiringly. "But I hope you understand that sometimes determination can have consequences." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She knew that he was trying to intimidate her to test whether she would back down, but she refused to show fear. She stood tall, meeting his gaze directly. "I know the risks," she whispered, her voice low but steady, "but I will not compromise my family's land. That is non-negotiable." Luke tilted his head, a small smirk playing on his lips. "Very well," he said, his tone light but edged with warning. "We'll see how this develops." After he left, Sarah immediately went inside to check on her father, who was sitting by the window, sipping tea. He looked up at her with concern. "Is everything all right?" he asked softly. Sarah shook her head slightly. "He wants to graze his cattle on our land," she explained. "I told him no, but I think he might try something anyway." Her father sighed, a mixture of frustration and worry crossing his face. "You did the right thing," he said firmly. "We've fought hard for this land and no one should make us compromise it. Just be careful, Sarah." Over the next few days, Sarah noticed subtle changes around the ranch. A few fence posts appeared slightly loose, as if someone had tested their strength. Footprints, too, showed up along the edges of the property, faint but distinct. Sarah began documenting everything, taking pictures and making notes. She knew that if things escalated, she would need proof of any intrusion or damage. The town, meanwhile, began to buzz with speculation. Neighbors whispered in hushed tones about the standoff between the Mitchells and Luke Thompson. Some admired Sarah for her courage, calling her brave and principled. Others worried that she might be provoking someone who had the resources to push harder. At the local diner, conversations often circled around the issue. "He's a man who gets what he wants," one resident said quietly. "Be careful, Sarah." Sarah listened politely but refused to be swayed. She understood the risk, but she also knew that yielding would have far greater consequences. The ranch was more than land. It was a symbol of her family's perseverance and hard work. Losing even a part of it would be devastating. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah heard a vehicle approaching from the gravel road. Her heart leapt into her throat when she recognized the familiar rumble of Luke's truck. He stopped near the edge of the pasture, and this time he didn't get out immediately. He watched the land, the cattle, and the fences, his expression unreadable. Finally, he stepped out and walked toward her, his boots sinking slightly into the soft soil. "I wanted to talk," he said calmly. "There are ways we can resolve this without conflict. I don't want anyone getting hurt, and I certainly don't want to upset the town." Sarah's eyes narrowed. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "I've made my position clear," she said quietly, though her voice carried determination. "You will not graze your cattle here, not now, not ever." Luke's gaze softened, but there was a steel edge beneath it. "You're very serious about this," he said. "I can see that. I respect it, but I hope you understand the consequences of defiance." Sarah's hands tightened into fists at her sides. "I understand," she whispered, "but I also know my responsibility. This land is my family's. I will protect it no matter what." The tension between them was palpable, yet neither moved toward conflict. They stood in silence, the only sounds the lowing of cattle and the rustle of wind through the trees. It was a quiet standoff, but one that carried the weight of potential escalation. Over the next several days, Sarah prepared for the possibility that Luke might act against her wishes. She repaired fences, reinforced gates, and checked every corner of the property. Each night, she made sure the animals were safe and secure. She even considered reaching out to the town sheriff to inform him of the situation, not wanting to provoke unnecessary conflict, but also wanting protection in case things went further. Then, one afternoon, she noticed something unusual. Luke's truck had been parked near the far edge of the property longer than normal. A group of his workers was nearby, moving quietly, almost cautiously. Sarah watched from the barn, her heart racing. Something was happening, though she couldn't yet tell what. She decided to confront him. Walking toward the truck, she called out, "Luke, what is going on over there?" Luke looked up, his expression calm but firm. "Just checking the fence lines," he said casually, "ensuring that everything is in order, no harm intended." Sarah didn't fully trust him. There was something in his tone, in the way he avoided her gaze, that made her uneasy. She returned to her chores but remained vigilant, aware that any misstep could lead to serious consequences. Later that evening, Sarah sat with her father on the porch discussing the day's events. "He's testing you," her father said, his voice grave. "Luke doesn't give up easily. He's trying to see how far you'll go before you give in." Sarah nodded slowly. "I won't give in," she said firmly. "I've worked too hard for this land, and I won't let him intimidate me." Her father placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then you must be ready," he said, "not just for what he might do, but for how the town might react. People will take sides, and not everyone will support you." Sarah understood the weight of his words. Standing up to Luke wasn't just about defending land. It was about courage, responsibility, and resilience. And she knew that the coming days would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. The next morning, as the sun rose once more, Sarah felt a mix of anxiety and determination. Luke's presence was growing more pronounced, and she knew it was only a matter of time before the situation escalated. She had made her choice, and now she had to prepare for whatever consequences it might bring. The ranch was quiet, but tension hung in the air like a storm cloud waiting to break. Sarah's heart beat steadily, a reminder that courage often comes in moments of fear. And somewhere beyond the tree line, Luke Thompson was watching, planning, and waiting. The town of Red Creek would soon witness a confrontation that no one would forget. The morning sun rose slowly over Red Creek, casting golden light across the Mitchell Ranch. Sarah Mitchell was already awake, as usual, moving quietly among the animals. The day promised nothing unusual at first glance, but Sarah could feel the tension in the air, a quiet pressure that had been building for weeks. Her intuition told her that today might be different, that the delicate balance she had maintained with Luke Thompson was about to shift in ways she couldn't yet predict. She had spent the past several days reinforcing fences, checking gates, and making sure every part of the land was secure. Every time she looked across the fields toward Luke's property, she saw signs of preparation: workers moving equipment, trucks arriving earlier than necessary, and shadows of movement across the grazing pastures. Luke was methodical, patient, and determined. And Sarah knew he was testing her. Her father, still recovering from his illness, sat on the porch, sipping tea. "You're too hard on yourself," he said softly. "I see the way you worry, but you've done everything you can to protect this place. Whatever happens today, remember that." Sarah shook her head, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "It's not just worry," she said quietly. "It's anticipation. I know he's going to try something, and I need to be ready." The first sign that something was about to happen came when she heard the distant sound of hooves and the low rumble of Luke's truck approaching her property. At first, she thought it was another routine inspection, but the sound was different this time. Louder, more deliberate. Her heart began to race, a mixture of fear and determination flooding through her. She ran to the edge of the field, gripping the fence tightly, and watched as Luke rode toward the Mitchell Ranch, his eyes scanning every inch of the land. Behind him, a herd of cattle followed, moving steadily across the neighboring property. The scene sent a jolt through her. She realized immediately that he was not here to talk this time. "Stop!" Sarah shouted, her voice carrying across the field. "You have no right." Luke paused for a moment, looking toward her with a calm but unreadable expression. "I understand your concern," he said slowly, "but I need to move my cattle for a short time. It will not take long and there will be no damage." Sarah's voice shook slightly with anger. "No. I told you before, this land is not yours. You will not bring your cattle here." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment it seemed as though time itself had paused. Luke's eyes narrowed, but he made no move to stop. He was confident, even audacious, in a way that made Sarah's heart pound. She could see the cattle moving steadily forward, their hooves pressing into the grass and earth. Every step they took could damage the carefully maintained pastures, and the thought made her stomach twist. Without thinking, she ran toward the nearest fence, trying to block the path of the cattle. "Stop, please," she shouted, waving her arms frantically. But Luke's herd was too large, too powerful. The animals continued forward, unstoppable in their momentum. By the time she reached the fence, the damage was already visible. Grass was trampled, the earth compressed under the weight of hooves, and small patches of crops flattened. Sarah's heart sank, but she refused to show defeat. She stepped back, taking a deep breath, and watched Luke with sharp, determined eyes. "You've crossed a line," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I warned you." Luke looked at her quietly, as though weighing his next move. "Sometimes lines need to be tested to see how strong they are," he said softly, almost philosophically. His words made Sarah grit her teeth. He wasn't just testing the land, he was testing her. The townspeople, who had begun to gather along the edges of the fields after hearing rumors, started murmuring among themselves. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered words of encouragement to Sarah. She could feel their eyes on her, some full of support, others full of doubt. The pressure of their attention only strengthened her resolve. Sarah immediately decided to act. She ran back to the ranch house and grabbed her camera and notebook, documenting the event as best as she could. Every movement of Luke's cattle, every step across her land, every broken fence post, she recorded it all. This was not just about protecting her land now. It was about protecting her family's rights and preparing evidence in case things escalated further. Luke, noticing her actions, raised an eyebrow. "You're serious about this," he said. "Very serious." "I will not let you destroy this land," Sarah replied firmly. "I've worked too hard and my family depends on it. I warned you." Despite the tension, Luke made no move to stop her. It was clear that he had expected resistance. He was confident, but Sarah realized something important. His confidence didn't mean he was invincible. He was methodical, but she had prepared, and she had the community watching. Hours passed, and the situation became increasingly tense. Luke's cattle continued to graze, and the land showed visible signs of wear. Sarah worked tirelessly to protect what she could, repairing minor damages, reinforcing fences, and documenting every action. The townspeople whispered among themselves, some expressing outrage, others admiration for her courage. Sarah felt a mix of exhaustion and determination, but she refused to step back. As evening approached, Luke finally signaled for his workers to move the cattle back. The damage had been done, but the intensity of the confrontation had reached a critical point. Sarah stood at the edge of the field, breathing heavily, her clothes covered in dust and dirt, but her eyes blazing with resolve. The townspeople, who had watched the entire confrontation, began to gather around. Their murmurs turned into conversation, and soon everyone had an opinion. Some were outraged by Luke's actions, seeing it as an abuse of power. Others worried about the potential for escalation if matters continued unchecked. Sarah listened quietly, her mind focused on the land and the responsibility she carried. The next morning, news of the confrontation began to spread. Sarah realized that the events of the previous day were not just a local incident. They were a story that would reach beyond Red Creek. She documented everything meticulously, preparing for any inquiries or official reports that might come. She knew that the truth had to be clear and undeniable. Luke, meanwhile, appeared unfazed by the growing attention. He continued his work on his property, but there was a subtle change in his demeanor. The boldness he had displayed yesterday was tempered by caution. He knew that Sarah's resolve, combined with the watchful eyes of the town, had created a situation where his actions were now under scrutiny. Sarah spent the following days repairing damage and reinforcing fences. She worked with her father and a few trusted neighbors, ensuring that the ranch remained functional and secure. Every step she took was measured, every decision deliberate. She understood that the confrontation was only the beginning, and she needed to be ready for whatever might come next. One evening, as the sun set over the fields, Sarah sat on the porch with her father. They watched the sky turn shades of pink and orange, a moment of calm after days of tension. "You were brave today," her father said softly. "I know it wasn't easy." Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "I had no choice," she replied. "This land is everything to us. I couldn't let it be taken, even for a moment." Her father smiled faintly. "Sometimes courage isn't about fighting alone. It's about standing firm, even when the odds seem against you. You did that today." Sarah felt a sense of quiet pride but also a lingering unease. She knew that Luke's actions, though temporarily restrained, were not the end of the story. He had tested her, and while she had held her ground, she had no illusions about the challenges that might lie ahead. In the following days, the town's attention turned fully toward the Mitchell Ranch and Luke Thompson. Conversations at the diner, the general store, and even at church reflected the growing interest and concern. People debated who was right, who was wrong, and what consequences might follow. Sarah remained focused, refusing to be distracted by gossip or speculation. She continued to work the land tirelessly, tending to animals, repairing fences, and ensuring the ranch was protected. Her determination was unwavering, but she also began to realize the importance of community support. Neighbors offered assistance, advice, and encouragement, and Sarah accepted it gratefully. She understood that standing alone was difficult, but standing with the community could strengthen her position. Luke, observing from his property, seemed to recognize the shift in dynamics. The confrontation had drawn attention, and his reputation was now on the line. He continued his work, but with a cautious approach, aware that the town was watching and that Sarah's resolve could not be underestimated. As the week came to a close, Sarah reflected on the events that had unfolded. She realized that this confrontation was more than a dispute over land. It was a test of character, resilience, and courage. She had faced fear, intimidation, and uncertainty, yet she had stood firm. The Mitchell Ranch remained intact, and her family's legacy was preserved, at least for now. The story of the confrontation began to circulate beyond Red Creek, capturing the attention of neighboring communities. Sarah's determination, combined with her careful documentation, painted a clear picture of a young woman defending her family's land against a persistent and powerful neighbor. It was a story of courage, responsibility, and the quiet strength that can emerge in moments of adversity. And as the sun set once again over the Mitchell Ranch, Sarah knew that the coming days would bring new challenges. Luke Thompson had been tested, but the story was far from over. She was ready, prepared, and determined to continue protecting what was rightfully hers, no matter the cost. The following morning, Red Creek awoke to a golden sunrise, painting the fields and hills with a warm, peaceful glow. But the Mitchell Ranch, despite the quiet of the early hour, carried an undercurrent of tension. Sarah Mitchell moved across the property with careful precision, checking fences, inspecting the pastures, and ensuring that the animals were all safe. The previous confrontation with Luke Thompson had left the land slightly damaged, but more importantly, it had left a mark on her spirit. She had stood her ground, defended her family's legacy, and survived the storm, but she knew this was not the end. The town, meanwhile, was buzzing with the story. Sarah's courage had spread quickly, first through whispers and soon through public conversations at the diner, the general store, and even at the county office. People debated Luke Thompson's actions and Sarah's steadfast defense. Some praised her bravery, calling her a symbol of resilience, while others expressed worry about the potential for further escalation. Sarah was aware of the attention, but she refused to let it distract her from her responsibilities. The ranch came first. Sarah's father joined her on the porch that morning, his eyes following her movements across the fields. "You've done well, Sarah," he said, his voice soft but proud. "The town is talking about you. You've inspired people, even without meaning to." Sarah smiled faintly, her gaze still on the horizon. "I didn't do it for recognition," she replied. "I did it because it had to be done. This land, it's our family's life. I couldn't just stand by." Her father nodded, understanding her determination. "And that is what makes you strong," he said. "Strong enough to face whatever comes next." Meanwhile, Luke Thompson had been quiet for several days. His bold move to graze his cattle on the Mitchell land had drawn public attention, and he seemed to realize that his reputation and actions were being scrutinized. He continued his work on his own property, but with noticeable caution, aware that Sarah was vigilant and that the town was watching. He understood that pushing further without careful consideration could result in serious consequences. Sarah, however, was not content to simply wait. She continued her work with meticulous attention, repairing any damage caused by the cattle, reinforcing fences, and ensuring that her property was in excellent condition. She knew that preparation was the best defense, and she also understood the importance of having evidence should the situation escalate legally. Her notebook, filled with observations, dates, and photographs, became a record of her careful stewardship of the land. As the days passed, the community's support for Sarah grew. Neighbors offered help with repairs, shared advice, and provided encouragement. The local sheriff, aware of the ongoing tension, visited the ranch to speak with Sarah and her father. He reminded them of their legal rights and offered guidance on how to handle any further incidents without escalation. Sarah appreciated his support, but she remained focused on her own resolve. She had faced Luke's intimidation before, and she was determined not to allow fear or outside opinion to influence her decisions. One afternoon, a meeting was called at the town hall to address the growing concerns about Luke Thompson's actions. Many residents attended, eager to voice their opinions and understand the situation more fully. Sarah and her father attended as well, prepared to speak and present their perspective. The room was filled with tension as the townspeople debated the best course of action. When Sarah spoke, she did so with clarity and composure. "This is not just about land or property," she said, her voice steady. "It's about fairness, responsibility, and respect. Our family has worked hard to maintain this ranch, and no one should have the power to threaten that without consequences. I have acted to protect what is rightfully ours, and I will continue to do so." Her words resonated with the community. Many nodded in agreement, while others expressed their support vocally. The room, once tense, began to feel a sense of unity. People realized that Sarah's fight was not just her own. It was about principles that affected the entire town. Luke Thompson, who attended the meeting reluctantly, listened quietly. He realized that his actions had not gone unnoticed and that the community's perception of him had shifted. The boldness he had displayed earlier now required careful reconsideration. He spoke only briefly, acknowledging Sarah's position and the importance of maintaining respect and fairness in all dealings. Following the town meeting, Sarah returned to the ranch with a renewed sense of determination. She continued her daily routines, tending to the animals, repairing fences, and ensuring that the property was in the best condition possible. The confrontation had tested her, but it had also strengthened her resolve. She understood that standing up for what was right was not always easy, but it was necessary. As the weeks passed, Luke Thompson adjusted his approach. He no longer attempted to push boundaries aggressively, and interactions between the two parties became measured and respectful. The ranching operations continued on both properties, but the tension that had dominated the previous weeks gradually eased. Sarah's vigilance and careful preparation had paid off, and the community's support had reinforced the importance of fairness and integrity. Sarah took time to reflect on the events that had unfolded. She walked through the fields in the early morning, feeling the dew on the grass and the warmth of the rising sun. She thought about the courage it had taken to stand her ground, the careful planning and preparation, and the support of her father and neighbors. She realized that strength was not only in physical action, but also in patience, foresight, and moral conviction. Her father joined her on one of these walks, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've grown stronger through this," he said quietly, "not just as a rancher, but as a person. You've shown that courage comes in many forms. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's bold, but it's always necessary when protecting what matters most." Sarah nodded, understanding the truth in his words. The land was her responsibility, but so was the example she set for the community. She knew that actions grounded in integrity and respect could inspire others and bring about positive change, even in challenging circumstances. The town of Red Creek slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but the story of the confrontation lingered in people's minds. Conversations at the diner and general store often referenced Sarah's determination and Luke Thompson's measured response. The events had sparked discussions about fairness, respect, and the importance of standing up for what is right, and these lessons became a subtle but enduring influence on the community. Sarah continued to work tirelessly on the ranch, her days filled with chores, animal care, and land maintenance. Each task, though routine, carried deeper significance now. Every fence she repaired, every pasture she tended, and every animal she cared for was a reminder of the responsibility she bore and the courage she had shown. Luke Thompson, for his part, adjusted his ranching practices to respect the boundaries and the wishes of the Mitchell family. He maintained professionalism and civility in all interactions, understanding that the community's eyes were on him, and that respect for others was a crucial aspect of his own reputation. As the months passed, the relationship between the two ranchers became one of cautious respect. While there was no friendship, there was understanding, an acknowledgement that boundaries were to be respected, and that integrity and fairness mattered more than personal gain. Sarah realized that the confrontation had not only protected her land, but had also fostered a greater sense of responsibility and accountability in her neighbor. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in brilliant shades of red and orange, Sarah stood at the edge of her fields, looking across the land she had fought to protect. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the familiar sounds of animals settling for the night. She felt a sense of peace, tempered with the understanding that vigilance was always necessary, but comforted by the knowledge that she had acted with courage, wisdom, and fairness. Her father joined her on the porch once more. "You've done something remarkable," he said softly. "Not just for the ranch, but for yourself, for this town, and for everyone who witnesses your actions. You've shown what it means to stand firm with integrity." Sarah smiled, feeling a mixture of pride, relief, and quiet strength. "I only did what I had to do," she replied. "But I understand now that standing up for what's right is never wasted, even when it's difficult." The story of Sarah Mitchell's courage became a part of Red Creek's history. It was a tale of resilience, determination, and the quiet strength that comes from protecting what matters most. It inspired neighbors, friends, and even strangers to consider the value of integrity, fairness, and perseverance in their own lives. The Mitchell Ranch continued to thrive under Sarah's care, a living testament to her dedication and courage. The animals flourished, the fields grew strong and green, and the fences stood tall, symbolizing the boundaries she had fought to protect. Life returned to a sense of normalcy, but with the lessons of the confrontation embedded in the town's memory. As Sarah walked through the fields one final time in the evening light, she understood something profound. Courage was not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was a quiet whisper, a firm decision, a willingness to stand firm even when others doubted or feared the consequences. And in that quiet courage, she had found not only strength but also respect, community support, and the enduring legacy of her family's land. Sarah looked toward the horizon, where the last rays of the sun glimmered on the hills beyond Red Creek. She knew that life would continue to present challenges, but she also knew that she was ready. Her resolve, tempered by experience, had grown stronger. The ranch, the land, and the legacy she protected were safe, at least for now, and the story of her courage would remain a source of inspiration for years to come. The town of Red Creek, once quiet and routine, had been reminded of the power of integrity and determination. Sarah Mitchell's stand against intimidation and her unwavering commitment to her family's legacy had changed the community in subtle but lasting ways. And as the stars began to appear in the night sky, Sarah felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had faced her fears, protected what mattered most, and emerged stronger than before.